Welcome to the Starting Over Podcast. I'm your host, Edward Shelton, aka Dark Logos, and this is a show where we look at the strategies, tactics, and mechanics behind the game of heroclix. Just had a busy last couple of days. Recorded the Quarry yesterday with Howard Brock. Drove my father around, did some editing of said show. Just salsa danced, chilled. Play some Warframe. But yeah, I'm sort of recording this episode a little late today. I'm trying to also get a new computer rig, and I'm having a lot of problems lately. And I know for those who have dealt with me surviving the great computer crash of 2014, and also me dealing with just Skype and my recorder and just stuff not working. I know some people would be like, it's about darn time. But I'm trying to get a rig that's going to work out economically for me. And I'm trying to figure out if I need to just completely upgrade everything. And then whatever I get, I need to then export technically 4 hard drives in addition to the hard drive that's in there. So it would be hosting 5 hard drives inside, which I don't even think would be a good idea. But I got that much stuff that I need to store. And then some people would say, dude, if you have 5 hard drives, what are you doing? I'm like, I got over 10 years worth of data. Just straight up, just being blunt. It's over 10 years worth of data. So yeah, there we go. Alright, so let's get into today's show. And today's show is going to be WizKids has a tournament problem. Okay, that's going to be the title of the show. WizKids has a tournament problem. Now, some of you might be saying, alright, what's this built off of? And if you've listened to any other more awesome and more frequent podcasts, you'll hear Married with Quick Clicks, 2 Clicks from KO, just about any group right now on Facebook talking about how WizKids wants to propose this new, potentially trial version of their new competitive formula for a tournament. Now, the main goal is to stop what they deem as a negative tactic, which is turtling. Now, let's unpack that for just a moment. Now, the main complaint with turtling, it comes in small parts with competitive, but it mainly comes from mid-tier to casual complaints. It's like, look, my opponent killed one figure and then they ran away. And then the whole idea of this doesn't feel very comic booky. This doesn't feel very I pursue the evildoers type mechanic or role play that you would think is doable with the game system. And now, where I would somewhat come back in is, if you want to role play, then heroclix needs to release a role playing guide. Okay, and it's not hard. And truthfully, there is probably somebody can make a mint right now, just making a role playing guide for heroclix. And and when you make your money, can you just throw some money to me at Starting Over Podcast? And if you want to co-author, I'll help you. But realistically, that's what you're talking about. You want to make a role-playing interaction move along the same lines as competitive. Now, that's problem number 1. That's not possible, because comic book logic is stupid. Comic book logic is stupid. When all's said and done, why does Superman does what Superman does? Because he has plot armor. That's why he does what he does. Superman won't die. You know that. Superman won't die. As much as he's fighting Doomsday for the 8th time. It's no, Superman won't die. Batman won't die. And if they do die, it's an event. and then they'll come back, just like every other character that has any sort of economic significance for a franchise. So, going back, we understand that there is a concern between part of the competitive, mainly the mid-tier and to casual spectrum, about turtling. Okay, so now they're going to try to say, like, hey guys, look, we're going to make it so that we want you to just go at each other and just roll dice and attack. Now, here's the problem. You have survivor points, which then is you're trying to indicate that a better player not only wipes out their opponent, but also is able to maintain a good chunk of their force. Okay, now, for this to happen in a high-level competitive arena, you need to have a lot of defense. So there's going to be a lot of defense, a lot of hard controls. There's going to be some damage, but you're not going to see a lot of burst damage teams. Burst damage teams will exist, but the burst damage teams that exist for that format to be functional, you're talking about the game being over in 5 turns. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants the game to be over in 5 turns, because now, functionally, you're looking at, 20-minute to 30-minute games. Now, WizKids for Origins might say, hey, that would be beneficial. And actually, from a esports Twitch perspective, a streaming perspective, a hyper-aggressive, throwing lots of dice, lots of attacks, is more pleasurable to watch on stream. Okay? Now, I'm going to make some assumptions. Okay? Now, these are some clear assumptions having looked at high-level play, having commentated on high-level play, and looked at... This isn't a slight at the guys that do the commentary for WizKids at Origins. They're just not very interesting. They're not very interesting. And the last 2 years, they sort of pull, outside of like your top games, they sort of pull like boring games on stream, like matchups that are crap, that like crap to watch. Like Derek Thompson's team 2 years ago, or well, last year technically, should never have been on stream. It's boring. I sidestep over you and you can't move, and then I kill you. I'm not saying it isn't tactically brilliant, because it was, but it's boring. Alright? Now, so what they want to do is make heroclix more entertaining, more casual friendly, and a quicker engage, and more combative. These are my assumptions of what they want to do. Alright? Not necessarily saying I'm correct, but I would figure, considering all the trends that they've been doing, those are desires that they want. The number one problem with all of this shenanigans is these core concepts are not translated into game design. And these core concepts are not translated into the powers and abilities of the game. For example, if barrier worked like this, I put up barrier. If you shoot through 2 barriers, no damage is done, but the barriers are blown up. If you shoot through 1 barrier, all damage that is received or dealt is reduced by 2 before other game effects. Okay, so what it would do, or subtract 2 from the damage before other game effects. So what that would do is barrier would still be a defensive option, okay, but barrier wouldn't make it so that one action can negate. One action is a 1-to-1 ratio for negation, outside of approved targeting destroys blocking. I.e., it takes 1 attack for me to destroy 1 square of barrier. So if I take one power action and put up barrier, my opponent takes one attack to destroy barrier. What I have done is created a 1-to-1 exchange. Alright. Now if my opponent only has one attacker, that 1-to-1 exchange will always be in my favor until I'm pushed. Then I can't put up that action, and my opponent can just be like, well, I don't have any actions on me, so action tokens on me, so I'm going to attack. Alright, now, going back to what I said before. Barrier inherently slows down the game. Barrier provides a strong defensive option, not just from a damage reduction standpoint, but from a control of movement standpoint as well. Okay? I can contain, box in, stop people from getting to certain places just because of barrier. So, if I was encouraging a game that was being more aggressive and force people to, go at each other, I wouldn't want to completely penalize defensive options, because penalizing defensive options eradicates a type of player that's necessary. You need a defensive player. You need defensive player styles, because if not, your game will only be able to swing between aggro and control. And trust me, you don't ever want to live in a game that swings between aggro and control. I've lived through that with Universal Fighting System during the period in which I was playing Universal Fighting System. It went from hard control to aggro, and there wasn't like good defense, because good defense was just used to reinforce the control. So anyway, powers like barrier fundamentally, before Cosmic Spider-Man was introduced, was about to dominate worlds. Okay, which would have made this whole little interaction of I snipe one piece and I win a bigger deal. So what also that comes in is that if you don't change how barrier works, you don't change how smoke cloud works, anything that slows down engagement, incapacitate, if you don't change how those powers work to make them more aggressive, control-y, but still aggressive, you're not going to have an interesting esport. You're going to still have the turtling. You're still going to have the running away. You're still going to have all these things. So let's go on to the second element of this, is mobility in space. Okay, or we can just summarize it as the space problem. Okay, so WizKids decides, like, yo, man, we're going to introduce a bunch of hyper taxis into the game. We're not going to make TK a thing, because TK creates retreat options. Okay, once you combine it with hypersonic speed, it just does. We already know it does. We don't need to pretend it doesn't. So buffing TK and taking TK's range from 8 back to 10 does not fundamentally fix any core problems that they have right now about running and about turtling. Okay? Because, again, all you're going to do is send out your main attacker, they're going to hypersonic speed up, make their little shot or whatever, and then loop-de-loo right back. Alright? You still have a space problem. At the other end, you can't keep having game effects, which allows a player to be aggressive and makes attacks, and not leave their starting area. Period. Faust Yellow should never exist as a core game concept. And I know some of you that have played the game for a longer period of time said, hey, but didn't General Thunderbolt Ross do the same thing? Yes, he did, for a smaller space, for a lot less, for I think it was 3 damage, and he was unique, and you could only do it once in the game. Then I know someone else will say, well, what about Magneto that could do the missile barrage thing? And again, Magneto had to get into your opponent's starting area before he could do his little missile barrage thing. Alright? So there was some strong, aggressive limitations on game effects that pretty much had aggressive map reaches before Faust. Okay? And even if you want to argue, hey, look, Supreme Intelligence at 250 can also do blankety blank blank. And I would have just come back as like Bizarro Green Arrow just like ruined that guy's day. So he's not even viable. So when we sort of come back to it, game design shouldn't create mechanics that allow a person to be aggressive without leaving their starting area. Okay, now this leads into the next dynamic, going back to the previous dynamic what I said about the hypertaxis. Hypertaxis allow for the game to mitigate spatial interactions and bring people to the mid-board faster. But just because you get to the mid-board faster does not necessarily dictate that you've entered mid-game. It does accelerate some of the core prospects of the mid-game, entering into the mid-game, but it does not accelerate the mid-game to be turn 2, turn 3. Okay, and I want to make that clear. Okay, so once you have all these, hypertaxis, you can have all sorts of other elements that like boost up their effectiveness, their movement, the limitations that they have. Hey, this one can phase, so it can get anywhere. This one can carry 5 people. This one can carry 8 people, but not as far, but it's still pretty good. Like this one, if you use him, you have a chance to attack afterward. Oh, this one has a global prop, so it's useful. And it's not just sucking up points. Oh, this one is a good attacker. There's all these elements that these taxis are deploying and using that are motivating us, are supposed to motivate the player base to use them. But if you notice that the player base still doesn't use taxis outside of uniquely designed teams, because TK and a main attacker is far more energy efficient than a taxi and a hyper deploy. Because again, a hyper deploy is an all-in strategy, and most teams don't work in that mechanic mindset. Okay? Imagine a player that plays poker, and every time they just shove all their chips in and then say, I call. Like, eventually you would say, like, yeah, maybe the first few times it seems all bold, but after a while it just seems foolish. And that's where the adaptation of defense comes in, because an aggressive hyper taxi can easily be screwed over by a couple of pieces of well-placed barrier, especially overdrive. If the team isn't designed to get past all that, yeah, I'm on WizKid's office map, barrier here. I'm over in this part of the I'm over in this part. Oh, you can't, drop Cap off and have her charge and hit me with the tank because there's barrier here and here, which means that you functionally have to stop, maybe have Cap shoot, and then have somebody, do an attack the following turn and then have Cap charge. Oh, what that would mean is that you're in perfect position for me to light you the heck up. I mean, that's the truth. So, you start to see that if, even with this all-in situation, you would end up having to start creating elements that fundamentally doesn't move the game forward, but it technically regresses it back to its origins. And the main reason I say that is we've seen characters come back historically, being limited to a character that's able to take actions after Taxi. But we forget that classically all characters could take actions after Taxi until the rule. Alright? Now, actions after Taxi made several characters really strong and fundamentally useful, not just from the aggressive end, but also from the Taxi end. So it's no surprise that like PJ structured his team using a figure that breaks a fundamental rule of the game, and the popos roll by. when you break a fundamental rule of the game, it makes you ask the question is, if this figure can do it, well, why not all figures? And then the realistic reason is that this figure that breaks this rule can break this rule on a very small scale. The problem is when WizKid says, oh, no one had a problem with blank, let's escalate blank. No one had a problem with A, so let's escalate A into B and make it not just B, but B squared. So it's way more powerful than what we wanted. And well, what the game can actually deal with, and thus you get stuff that ends up having to go back on the watch list or be re-examined or be reworded because WizKids will not understand that the specific dosage of certain powers or certain abilities that break the core rules needs to be minor. That if you expand it into major game effects, that just causes problems and starts, and you end up with a myopic view of the game. Okay. All right. So we start to see that the hypertaxi doesn't solve anything because TK is way more energy efficient, and that you have a attacker that is able to deal immediate damage, is able to go out, running shot, hypersonic speed, charge, do the phasing attack, whatever it may be, is way more efficient than a hypertaxi. Now, yes, a hypertaxi, like I said before, can bring multiple figures in, but if you are not thinking in a swarm capacity, or the gameplay does not benefit a swarm capacity, then guess what? A big attacker with TK is still better. All right, so keep pushing, things forward. When we still come back to that space issue, there's some other core concepts that we have to be mindful of. The big thing is how long before the engage. How long before the engage? Now, I know some people would say, like, okay, in older games, it would take it would take 3 turns before usually the first attack would go off. Okay, and 3 turns is not bad. Okay, then when we look at truthfully about a year and a half. About a year and a half, 2 years ago, you would say turn 2, you're dealing with your opponent. Like you had to be ready to go by turn 2. Really, yeah, since then till now, it's like if you can't deal with whatever you need to deal with by turn 2, I'm sorry, you're screwed-o. Okay. And so that's an issue as well. Is that if you're not ready to go by turn 2, in most games, you're done. But when you start talking about getting into that setup, making sure that you're in a solid offensive and defensive position, that you're going into positioning that doesn't hurt you, but allows you to make plays, then functionally, that should take time in a tactical game. But if you want to rush that, then yeah, hypertaxis sort of help. But if you really want to rush that, there needs to be an incentive to move the gameplay forward. Okay. The next element of that's a problem with space is maps. All right. Maps are a really big problem. And this is where I sort of feel for the map makers, whoever they are. Because if you make maps purely under a game design precept, which I feel game design and maps should be working hand in hand. They should be doing their special high five with each other, freaking patty caking or whatever the heck they need to do to understand where game design wants the game to go and where the map maker feels creativity and comic book accuracy for the location, quote unquote, needs to like come into play. Okay, so with that being said, if you want to encourage engagements that are offensive, you have to minimize blocking terrain and walls. If you want to funnel people into attacks, you have to increase the amount of water terrain or solid masses of blocking terrain and move people forward. You have to compact the space. You have to lead the eye like in artwork. When you look at a piece of artwork, there's a point where the artwork makes you look at a core point and then guides you to, the rest of the piece of the work. The same thing has to go with maps. There should be obvious points where a player will want to set up that will lead into an engage, not to set up to stay there. This means like maps like ranks shall never exist again in the game. Maps like WizKid's Office should never exist in the game again. Maps like Cargo Ship Map, Friendly Neighbor should never exist in the game. And the main reason is that those maps give you more than enough spacing to run away from your opponent, not engage your opponent, and utilize special characters that have improved targeting or whatever to score your points and then run. Okay, so a lot of folks never really played during the Wizard World era, but during the Wizard World era, they switched to what we have now as the modern age sizing of the maps, mainly because the maps were probably about like a third size wider if you ever saw any of the classic maps. And the main reason they switched to those maps was because of the existence of Icon Superman. Icon Superman, with his base range plus his movement, you could not catch him. Even, you gotta understand, we had 10 square TK at this point in time. Alright? So if you can't catch Icon Superman with your 10 square TK, then what are you going to do? Well, they had to shift down the maps. They had to make it so that players needed to move towards each other. And they did some early experiments with the maps what I thought were, like looking back at them now, they were okay. They weren't freaking, glorious maps from yore. But they were maps that did a couple of core things. They limited movement. They made you have to use more movement than what you did classically. And they reined in range. Okay? Because you had 10 and 12 ranges still in the game. And those ranges were not necessarily mathematically effective on those early maps. But when we go back to Classic Wizard Worlds, in the Classic Wizard Worlds, everyone would play on one map. So the team design was strictly focused to maximize the figure pool on that one map. Now, a lot of people cried and was pissed off because it pretty much gave a false impression of what the game state was like. Because if you only have one map and then you're eventually releasing more and more maps, other maps have different advantages. They're not just the replacement of the same map with different colors and such. Alright, they have their own little tricks on that map as well. And so because of that, when we sort of look forward, the thought process of the classic Wizard Worlds, that the majority of the teams were very aggressive. Definitely when you look at the JSA map, when you have the Transporter Hawkeyes being used, and the KC Flash era of play with Precision Strike. They were all about high mobility and utilizing a specific part of the map. When you look at the Lamp era, I forgot if it was the Sinister map or what. There was some issues with that. There's a lot of things that when you come back and you try to break down the map process, the maps for that period of time forced gameplay to deal with them. Now, if we look at ourselves now, we have to say, like, all right, instead of the maps creating these hard concepts and saying, look, okay, the ranges are out of control, so the map is going to limit that. Then game design has to come back and says, okay, the ranges are out of control. We can't afford to print a 12 range again unless it doesn't have move and attack. We can't afford to print a 9 range again unless it doesn't have move and attack. The average range is going to be 6 and 7, which means that our high-end range for a standard character is going to be 8. If the high-end standard range of a character is going to be 8, we need to make maps that benefit that type of character so that they're still seen as viable. But at the same time, we also need to make maps where they don't just dominate everywhere. That you know, having 6 square range, which will be our new average range, will be more useful and cost effective. Okay? Or you start introducing strategies and mechanics that shrink the spaces between teams. Now, Spiral and Magic and freaking what is it? From the Spider-Verse, stuff that just pops people from the other side of the map and be like, ta-da, we're here, party over here, homie, yeah. You know, that crap, no. You don't want that, because then you make the idea of space and timing irrelevant. Okay? But what you do need to, you know, come back and do is just say, hey, we're going to, on average, we're going to increase the average movement. We're going to shrink the ranges, because how this game works is half your movement. So even if we increase the average movement by 1 or 2, you're only going to be increasing the running shot movement, the hypersonic speed movement, the charge movement by very little. Okay? But your normal movement of your average character, being able to just fully, you know, move out and, you know, chase down another character, starts to become more viable. And you really want to more so look at it like this. How many turns should it take for a character from one starting area go to the other starting area? And if you say 2 turns, then the average movement needs to be half the map. Okay, if you say 3 turns, okay, the average movement needs to be 1/3 of the map. Okay, so you need to be breaking it down like that. Now, I would say it's too much to say average character, and I'm not saying like specially pog making characters or support pieces that just sit there and massage, you know, the backs of all their fellow comrades. I'm talking about the aggressive pieces. Their movement should never, ever, 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 ever be 1/4 of the map in terms of movement. Ever. Okay? And the main reason is that if their main goal is to engage, and you want to make sure that no matter what piece your opponent has, that you're able to hunt them down if they run. And if you properly zone, there should be no place for them to escape. Okay, just from the fact is, like, we don't have firing arcs like other games. We have omnidirectional firing. Alright, so eventually, even if you have a 6 range, your aura of your character is 13. 1 for the square that you're in and 6 out from where you're at. That's a large area. And if the map is open enough, that is more than the max movement that your opponent can do to get outside of your total swing. Okay? So, anyway, so what we start to see is that the whole problem that's going on here, really so much is not in the player's hands per se. And it's really not in the judge's hands. It's really in game design. Game design and map making are the 2 major factors why games go the way that they do. Now, note, there isn't, you know, like I said before, a heroclix RPG book. And if there is, you know, and you want to you know, have me co-author and we'll get this stuff done, You know, we'll get the lawyers involved and we'll have it done, and we'll make some money, homie. I'll pimp that sucker out. You know, I'll pimp that sucker out on Facebook. You know, so but yeah, so going back, let's take it to sort of like the next step of where the core problems of the games comes in the perception of skill. All right. I will say I'm a master level player. I'm not a grandmaster level player. I've played against grandmaster level players. I'll say that. I'll put it like this. I played against George Masu, grandmaster level player. I've seen I have seen Patrick play, grandmaster level player. I've seen Daniel Jones played and practice with him, grandmaster level player. I've seen Derek Thompson play, grandmaster level player. I'll say this. I've seen Paris Gordon from his introduction into playing to how he is now, and he's just now. And I would say in like the last year, he's entered that grandmaster level play. Okay. Having seen grandmaster level play and seeing grandmasters play playing each other, there are very few times that games are wipes. Okay? There are very few times that games are wipes. And the main reason I say that is both players are going to do things that allow both of these two realities to exist. That they are to protect their assets while putting as much liability on your opponent's placement as possible. So they're protecting their assets, whether it be their perplex, their ID card summoner, their main attacker, whatever support that they have, and making sure that any aggressive actions that their opponent does will be met with high amounts of liability. Whether that means that they're going to get stuck in some sort of aura, that they're going to have to push to get a optimal attack off, that any sort of attack would lead from, one attack from the opponent would lead to 2 or even 3 attacks back to that figure from, the opposite team. There are tons of different scenarios that can go in there. Failure to make the proper movement means that in the next turn or 2, tokens are going to come off, and there's no way for the opponent to stop the aggression that's going to come. Okay, so there's a lot of elements that are involved, and if you want to see a great example of that, I don't know if it's still on YouTube or you can find it, or if anybody remembers it, minus the drama and whatnot, Easton versus Ed, or Uniquest. That by far was an example of grandmaster play on both parts, both from Ed and both from Easton. Now, if you look at the game, there was exchanges, there was points scored, but it wasn't, oh, look, Ed wiped Easton. No, there were still pieces on the board. You can't come back and it's like, oh, but look, all this stuff that was scored, it was hardly anything. It's like, no, there were some call-ins that were killed, I think, and there were some ID cards that were burned, and some core elements on both teams that were lost. So then you're sort of stuck looking back at like, all right, if this is the highest level of play and the scoring is moderate, then really is high level play about wipes? Now, and I open this up as a philosophical thought that WizKids needs to think about versus the reality that they want to present. And I really do mean that. So, it seems that the idealized reality that WizKids desires, or that a small part to that casual end, small part of hardcore to the casual end, desires or views that the idealized master or grandmaster heroclix player is a aggro player, B, a master tactician, and C, is able to just about wipe out their opponent or just about salt the earth so that their opponent can't exist. Now, I want that to sink in for just a moment. Just let that marinate for a moment. A little bit longer. Yep. Now, who comes into your mind that plays like that? Who? George? Some games. Patrick? Some games. Easton? Some games. But not consistently. Not every team that they built does that. Okay? So, let's just be honest and be real about this. It's almost like you're dealing with the idealized woman image or the idealized male image in every culture, even though it changes from culture to culture. Whether it's the Marilyn Monroe look or the classic Arnold Schwarzenegger look for the male image. I like the Denzel Washington look. I wish I could have that. I wish I had like maybe 50% of Denzel Washington smooth. Not his cool, just the smooth. The smooth, that makes a lot more go down than the cool. Folks hate the cool. You can't fight the smooth. Okay. But you see that disconnect between the actual reality of the day-to-day people. It's like, hey, Nazi Germany thought the idealized person was blonde hair, blue eyes, but the average German is sort of shortish with dark hair and brown eyes. What the heck? Yeah. So, anyway, sort of going back. So what we fundamentally see is that there's an ideological disconnect between reality and what we want reality to be. And that's a really big problem. Alright. Now, we start to see some new things. Some brand new realities. That the people at the bottom don't know what the top is like. And there's not enough exposure for people to see the top for them to understand what it's really like. And there's nothing from WizKid's perspective that informs the bottom to let them know what the middle and the top is like. Therefore, everybody has a speculation on what the apex and the zenith is without actually asking somebody what the apex and the zenith is like. Now, if you had somebody from the apex and zenith fight someone in the middle or in the nublet level, of course it's going to be one-sided. It's like The Rock versus a 12-year-old. The 12-year-old, you could be on the wrestling team, middle school wrestling team and all that, and he can be on the creatine. He's still going to get bodied by The Rock. Okay? It doesn't matter how, like if he's taught by an Olympian since he was, 5 years old and how to wrestle, The Rock is just going to, smack him down. Okay? The Rock doesn't even try. Okay? And I mainly say this, again, as a coach, and as a person who's coached a lot of people. Work with them the first time, they get better. Work with them the second time, they become a lot better. Work with them a third time, their entire venue doesn't know what the heck happened, and they can't beat them anymore. Where does that come from? Well, that comes from now you have experience in training, and you know more than the average person, and you know basic core concepts that the average person ignores. Thus, the person at the zenith, at the apex, at the top, is going to come down and just whoop everybody that's in the middle and lower. Okay? But again, if I want to set up one-sided fights, so, then yeah, shoot, that's what needs to happen. You need to just make it so that the people at the top constantly face people at the bottom for a good chunk of their games, and then eventually they play people at the top. Then you will have very dynamic games that allows you to just see somebody wipe another person. That's how it goes. Okay. But anyway, now I'm going to lead into my last point. And my last point is this. We don't know what we really want, but all we know is this. I'm reminded, and this is the preacher in me coming out. I'm reminded in the point in the Bible where Samuel's walking and God's like, "Yo, what's up, Samuel?" And Samuel says to God, "Yo, man, the people want a king." And he's like, God's like, "So they want to be like everybody else?" And Samuel's like, "Yeah." And then, Samuel's like, "Yo, they don't like the current tribe structure. And they want to, be like everybody else and definitively say that we have the best leadership ever." And then God's like, "Yo, do they know what comes with having a king?" And then, Samuel's like, "Nah, man, they don't know that." And God's like, "Yo, they didn't live under Pharaoh, so they don't know what's up with that. I was supposed to be their king, but okay, go talk to this Saul guy. He'll be your king, but they're gonna get mad once they have to start paying taxes, homie. And their girls start getting taken away to be in some dude's harem. But yeah, okay, they want that. I'll give it to them. I don't really want to give it to them, but okay, I'll give it to them." Leading to my point. People at the bottom, people in the middle, want to validate their play style of going into the middle and rolling dice. They not only want that, they also want to feel that by doing that and doing that well, they should be the world champion. They should be able to compete with their little, paradise in a dream and be one of the best players in the world. Right up there with George Massue and, Howard Brock, Easton Brock, PJ Bolin, all of them. Yeah, they feel like, man, nothing should really stop me from being there. Forgetting all the work, forgetting all the studying, forgetting all the practice, forget all the listening to podcasts, forgetting all this other stuff. Okay? And Whiz Kids is sort of sitting back. It's like, you know what? The more of our player base that has a dream and a pair of dice, the more likely they're going to show up to Origins and they'll show up to Worlds. Well, we have to give them incentives, so we'll create these tournaments so that people can qualify, and usually the more skilled people will qualify up first, and if we make the buys, and the bids roll down, more people can be at the national tournament. And if they're at the national tournament, they're already there. They can go ahead and dump more money in and try to qualify for Worlds. Just let it sink. Let it sink in. So, I'm not saying that's malicious. I'm not saying that's malicious at all. Naive, misguided, but not malicious. I want to make that clear. I've said Whiz Kids is high on a lot of things. Okay? This one, I'm not saying that they're high. I'm saying they're misguided and they're influenced by the wrong group of people. Okay? It's just like the people that are like, I want to see blank blank happen in this situation, but they don't spend money there. They just want it to be that way because they feel that all the world should work according to their worldview. Whether it be whatever political side you're on. So, going back, I feel is this. If you create a situation where you don't want people to turtle, you can't give survivor points. If you want to create a situation where people are aggressive, that's on game design. if you eradicate defensive options, you will lose a good chunk of your player base. You will lose a third of your player base because they don't have a place in your game. Okay, so what it really comes down to is there a mechanic that can be introduced to make people engage? And the answer is no. And do people really want a mechanic that forces people to engage? And the answer is no. If folks are like, oh, look, here's this rule now to stop turtling and make people actually leave their starting area. After turn 3, if any figures in their starting area, take 1 click of damage. Yeah, there you go. 1 click of damage. Do you know what all's going to happen? Between turns 1 and 2, you're just going to get characters 1 square outside of their starting area. That's it. That is literally it. It won't stop the turtling. It won't stop the running away. It won't stop the replacement. Hell, some people might actually use that to activate their characters. It's like, all right, it's turn 3, boom, automatically, I take that 1 click of damage. Now I have, Billy Batson is now Shazam. Boom. And then, the game's over. I don't know. Anything that you want to twist to encourage and prod people, eventually you'll get that mutant that's like, I absorb electricity and I shoot it back at you. It's inevitable. So what we wish will happen, what we desire to happen, what we want magically us to be and have our primal status needs as humans fulfilled through other folks worshiping our ability to roll dice and select plastic men and place them on a paper map. Okay? Just putting this all in context, people. We want all that satisfied by these new rules changes, and it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. The new tournament changes aren't going to do anything to motivate people to play. And it creates a situation, realistically, where yes, WizKids can run less rounds and determine a winner, but it also makes the entire situation anticlimactic. It makes it so that you actually reinforce turtling, and it takes the responsibility off of the main people that cause, the play state to be that way. And in part it is the players, but a majority of it's game design. A majority of it's game design. Just like I said, 40 minutes ago, if game design wanted, really, really wanted, if WizKids as a company really, really wanted for there to be this hard engage, for this to, for people to go at each other and not run away, they would make figures and encourage the design of figures that would do that. But they haven't. I think one of the best figures that encourages engagement is Peggy Carter. Because Peggy Carter gets better when she's closer to her opponent's starting area than she is her own. That encourages an engagement. If you made more characters like like Peggy Carter, and less characters like Spiral and Faust, who negate spatial elements, and even so much the hyper taxis, if you made more characters that benefited, they got stat bumps, they got cool powers, they got cool control abilities, they all of a sudden get steroided up where there's an incentive for the other team to use other mechanics like Force Blast and Barrier to limit that character so that they're doing actions that aren't just like, I'm going to go shoot you. Then you have a different, more dynamic game. You can still have cool characters that pick a power, even though pick a power is dumb and shouldn't really exist in this game. Just from a pricing standpoint, it should never exist in this game. But that image of what a master heroclix player or what a average game should look like will then change to be not just, oh, they ran away and turtle because they KO'd a 20 or 30 or 40 point piece, but it shifts to, okay, they did these things. In 2 turns, I should be able to pressure my opponent. My opponent's movement is such so that they can't get completely out of my strike zone, which will force them to engage. They put up barrier, so yeah, my attack will be lowered, my damage will be lowered by 2, but at the same time, that's just the first attack that goes through that plate of barrier, then it's destroyed. I'm going to follow up with blank, blank, blank attack, or do blank, blank, blank. Okay? That's really what has to happen. But for that vision of the game going in and we fully engage each other and we don't run away, I'm sorry. I'm realistically sorry. It's not possible without game design getting fully behind that vision, and not just getting fully behind that vision, scrapping any other mechanic that would be in opposition to that vision. Like ID cards. Like those have to be gone. They can't be in there. Special terrain can't be there. And you might be saying, like, why special terrain? Because you can't score it. There's nothing you can do outside wiping your opponent to score it. And it gives huge tactical advantage. And there's a huge reason to use it, in particular the boxing ring, to turtle. To turtle. Anyway, so in reality, I think, in reality, we want a better game. We want something that's good to watch. We want something that we believe is hard to master and play, but then we want to make it easily accessible. Trust me, we're not the only game that's going through that. Professional fighting scene, professional video game fighting scene is going through that right now. Street Fighter V, go just listen to the controversy on Street Fighter V. Okay, just go listen to the controversy on Street Fighter V, and you'll realize that we're dealing with the same problems. The people at the top feel like their effort in learning the game over the years has sort of been crapped on, and that the instability and upsets that have come in are primarily just not necessarily due to skill, but due to mechanics that have been introduced into the game to destabilize the game. It just does things to just destabilize the game. One is like the 8 frames of input lag versus typically other classic games have 4 frames of input lag. And that the 8 frame input lag is intentional, which forces there to be less defensive options and more aggressive options. They make the countering options way easier. I think it was called the Moment 77, where Daigo, if you ever watch it, where Daigo's playing Ken, he has like hardly any health left, and he blocks the Chun-Li super. Like, when you see that, you're like, oh my gosh! But then when you look at how Street Fighter V is now, you could, as a player with little experience, recreate that moment and just mash buttons. So is that moment as incredible if anyone can do it? So look at Worlds. Look at the final round of Worlds. You have Matty G on one end, you have Howard Brock on the other. And then someone said, hey, I'm going to remove Matty G, I'm going to remove Howard Brock. I'm going to put in this player that's been playing for 6 months, and I'm going to put in this other player that's been playing 3 months, and they're going to provide you with just as much nail-biting, high-strategy, entertaining game as these two players that made it through, all the rounds of grinders and out rounds. And a lot of you would say, like, no, I would want to see, the people that earned it, that earned it, that got there played. People that have put time in this game, I want to see them play. I don't just want it to be that person interchangeable regardless of skill level or even effort and time put into the game. So, I mean, I can say this. If you want to stop turtling, you need to build teams that can hunt people down. If you turtle and you like turtling, do what you do. Okay? It's up to you to play the strategies in this game that you want, that the game empowers you to have. But removing defensive options won't change anything. Empowering aggressive options in control will make the game worse. Okay? Straight up worse. Go back to when we had all these freaking aura effects. Okay? How annoying that was. Professor X coming off a team base, the science police, all that other dumb crap that we had for a while from Slosh, and what that did to the game. Okay? So, anyway, I just think overall WizKids is trying to make an effort to make the game better, and I appreciate that. But in the end, I don't think they know what they want the game to look like other than it being profitable. Profitable from watching, profitable from the YouTube, profitable from the personalities that they can put on their Facebook or write articles for them. They want it to be profitable. And I don't blame them. I want it to be successful. Please note the difference between the words. I want it to be successful. They want it to be profitable. Okay? But for the two to meet, there's going to have to be a real conversation on what the community actually is versus what they want it to be versus what it can be. That's 3 different things. All right, I've dragged this on too long. I'd like to thank y'all for listening. You can follow me on Twitter at StartOverPod. It came from outer space, and told me, man, you gotta let up on that YouTube. You gotta let up on YouTube. Watching too much of it. I know I normally don't get into music nor politics super hard on the show, but I freaking watched that new Jay-Z video, and that sucker, it's almost like he read too much Dr. Seuss, the 1 fish, 2 fish, 3 fish, blue fish, and made a music video with that beat. But that's just me, and I know he has kids, so that's why I was like, this sucker is slow. Like, super slow, like kids listening to it. But, I listened to it. There were some parts in there I agreed with. There were some parts I didn't agree with. But, I like that Life of OJ a little bit. I give it 2.5 stars out of 5. Anyway, you can email me at startingoverpodcast@gmail.com. That's startingoverpodcast@gmail.com. If you wish to opine, keep it pithy, keep it interesting, keep it awesome, baby. If you are interested in coaching, feel free to email me there. Put in the email tagline, coaching. And you can buy a Starting Over Podcast shirt, or to support Phoenix Nest, the Phoenix Nest shirt, in the link below. And if you want to donate to the show, you can go to startingoverpodcast.blogspot.com. It's been a while. I haven't been over there. And you can donate to me there. All right. I'd like to thank you all for listening. It's been a long show. Like I said, I have like a 2-hour episode of The Quarry with myself and Howard Brock. If you want to know some more candid behind-the-scenes elements of Phoenix Nest, definitely want to listen to that episode of The Quarry when it goes up. I thank you all for listening again, and remember, we all have to start over sometime.